So I do work in extension research and teaching, and a lot of it's overlapped. And on the extension side, when I started 19 years ago, I really enjoyed getting called for farrowing rate or pregnancy rate problems in September, because no matter what I told them to do, it would be fixed in about a month. And so, they could follow my advice, whether it was good or bad, things would be better. I just give one slide to kind of give an impact of seasonality, because it is a big deal. And everybody in the scientific literature is going to cite, is this a pointer? It's going to cite this St. Pierre paper from 2003 that says it costs the U.S. swine industry $300 million a year. Okay, and that's lost productivity, basically. And I like to come back to Steve Pullman when he was director of Western Operations, so about 400,000 sows, said seasonality costs me more than PRRS. And he said that at the Billy Day Symposium at Animal Science meetings in Des Moines. And that's a big statement, and so we said, PRRS is a big deal. So this is a plot, I stole this from University of Illinois. This is corn price and bean price, and this 2003 through 2013. And if this is a $300 million problem, and we know 70% of the cost of raising pigs is feed, it went from $6 to $12 basically, and beans doubled as well. So it's probably at least $600 million. So it's a big issue. I'm not going to talk very much on the male, but I want to show you a couple male slides. I've not done any seasonality work on males, a little bit of heat stress work, but I'm not going to show you any of that. The boar, pretty complex animal. This is this countercurrent blood flow, so arterial in red. The testicle would be in here, the venous. And all that intertwining, which is here, is for cooling the blood going into the scrotum. And so if you look at these temperatures, these are Celsius, but doesn't matter. 37 3/4, 38 1/4 degrees centigrade for rectal temperature. And this is scrotal temperature. And you can see that, it's 2, 3, 4 degrees cooler, and that's 5 to 6. Okay? And that's a very carefully orchestrated biological phenomenon. The testicle is very sensitive to heat. I'll show you one slide on results. This is old, from 2002. Billy Flowers presented this at our NCERA 57 Physiology Symposium. We do every other year, we do a half-day workshop for the industry. And we talked about seasonality, because we were trying to get people to start spending money to study seasonality. And so what Billy showed was 4 different studs in North Carolina. This is their discard rate, so they didn't meet minimum standards, 70% normal and modal. So in the winter, they threw away 6.7, 8.2, 2.4, and 4.5% of ejaculates for not meeting that standard. In the summertime, that 8 went to 10, the 6 went to 21, the 4.5 went to 35. Those are big. Okay. In 2002, we still had a lot of farms doing natural mating, and you wouldn't detect that. These boars look normal, they mount, they ejaculate. Okay. We also probably have some male effect on ejaculates that look normal, but they aren't. Okay. Now that's all I'm going to say about the male. There's been a lot more money spent on the female. There's a lot more females out there. I think the male is easier to fix, because we can air condition boar studs, and we do air condition a lot of boar studs. I don't know anybody with an air conditioned sow barn, and I expect I can give this talk next year and the year after and still say that. Okay, so everything else is going to be focused on the female, and I'm not going to talk. I think I've got a couple of slides, but not much on the growing pig. So on the female, what happens? Okay, it's a list of things. And these are the sort of things that I get called on: delayed puberty, weak, short, irregular estrous cycles, high embryonic death, increased stillborns if it's late, increased abortions in sows that end up not in pigs, so I call that an undetected abortion. Decreased feed intake, which decreases growth, increases sow weight loss, delays wean to estrus for those sows. I'll show you one slide on sow mortality, and there just isn't room on the slide. You can keep going. There's lots of problems on the female side. Okay? Those of you that have sows could probably quantify that on your farm. This is USDA data. This is sow mortality by month. So this is December, so January through December, and this rolls along in this year, USDA data. 7 or 8%, it jumps up to 11 or 12%, okay, in the heat of the summer. Most of that's around farrowing, and I'm going to show you some data slides on temperatures. Okay, metabolically they're more active, their body temperature is higher, and they're closer to the threshold of sensitivity. Okay. This is another slide presented at our seasonality workshop in 2002, and this is pregnancy check by ultrasound at 28 days. Okay, so this is the average. That farm in a set of farms in 2002 was running 85 to 90%, and in the summer they dropped down to 75 or 80%, and they came back. Interesting thing, there's 56 barns in this farm, and they're identical. Okay, cool cells, they're all the same blueprints. Feed came out of the mills, semen came out of the same stud. And they said, well, what happens if we just take the farms with the highest pregnancy rate and the lowest? And so the lowest ran 80 to 85, so not a lot worse. In the summer, though, they dropped down to 65. The highest ran along 95%, and they dropped clear down to 90 in the heat of the summer. Okay, so why is that? Anybody want to guess? There's a little bit of, but why is the difference? I mean, why is these ones go to 90 and these go to 65? They have the same barns, the same genetics, a little bit of health difference. I'd argue the biggest difference is the people in the barns. Okay? And so the way that you solve the seasonality problem is you do everything right every day. Because we can't seem to get that done on every farm, we decided to keep pursuing this from a research standpoint. So this is temperature data from hobo loggers we put into commercial barns, a 24-hour day. This is a 2-week period in July or August in Missouri. Centigrade, but it doesn't matter, just your pattern. You know, at midnight it's still warm, it cools down, kind of 5 in the morning, sun comes up, gets hot in the afternoon, and drops back down. So our original work, this is the pattern we used. And we put our pigs in what we call our environmental chambers. Okay? We always have a thermoneutral control as well. If you want to know the impact of heat stress, you have to have something to compare it to. These are our environmental chambers, and they're set up, there's 4 of them, and we would set up one for heat stress with gestation stalls, and one for thermal neutral with gestation stalls, and other than that, they're identical. And then we would set up similar, one heat stress and thermal neutral with farrowing crates. Now these, we can fit 12 stalls and 6 farrowing crates. Okay? So all the work that I'm going to show you is replicates of that. There's 24 to 48 litters per treatment, depending on how many replicates we did. Okay? So think a little bit about heat stress. Pigs don't sweat appreciably. How do they deal with heat stress? Some of it's behavioral. And comfortable pigs stand a lot. Heat-stressed pigs sit instead of stand a lot. Okay? They want to stand, but it takes too much energy. They increase respiration rate, and that expires a lot of heat, as well as the evaporation helps cool. Skin temperature goes up because they shunt blood from the inside to the outside to help cool, just like the elephant sends that blood to the ears and waves their ears. If she could wave her skin, she'd do that. If these don't work, they do behavioral things. They look for mud and shade, except we put them in fully slatted enclosed barns. They can't, so if these don't work, rectal temperature goes up. And that's kind of our standard. If rectal temperature is maintained, then she succeeded at maintaining body homeothermy. So this is pigs that are in the chambers. This is day of the trial, so 2 weeks before farrowing, 21-day weaning. Okay, and they were either in a thermoneutral chamber the whole time, a heat stress chamber the whole time, or they went from thermoneutral in gestation to farrowing heat, or heat stress farrowing to thermoneutral. Sorry, heat stress gestation to thermoneutral farrowing. This is respiration rate. So these are the 2 heat stress, those 2 thermoneutral, and all it says is they have higher temperatures or higher respiration rates to cope with that elevated temperature. Respiration rate goes down in the thermoneutral rooms, and they switched. You can see these lines because they're comfortable and they got the pigs out, so they have a higher capacity of air intake because there's no fetuses. But in the hot chambers, it goes up because they're stressed a lot more because of body temperature. This is rectal temperature. Okay, those same sows. So down here, it's a little elevated maybe. This is when farrowing happens and it goes up. These are the 2 heat stress chambers. These are the 2 thermoneutral. This is the heat stress ones that were in thermoneutral over here. Okay. Remember, respiration rate didn't go up for the thermoneutral chambers, but their temperature did, and it's a full degree centigrade. Okay, that's a new set point. And when we did this study, we thought this is weaning, and we measured them for 10 days after weaning, and we thought, well, it just hadn't returned all the way to this temperature. But as it turns out, when they get pregnant, their body temperature actually lowers. Okay, and that's all I'm going to say about that. All of that work is done with parity 1 females, and we know they're more sensitive. We said, well, what happens in the barn? So we went out to our research farm, the main farm, and we just looked at parity 1 females and multipair sows. Same thing, 2 weeks before farrowing or 3 weeks. When they farrowed, their temperature, yep, it went up. P1's a little higher.
Could you go back one slide?
Yep.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. The P1s did go up higher. Remember, this is an animal that has the same essential level of milk production, so she's got all that metabolism. She's also still growing. So she has more metabolic heat, and that's demonstrated there. So back to our research population. What about feed intake? Here it's controlled. They're limit fed. We drop them to half that a couple days before farrowing. They farrow. This is the average of 24 pigs in each line. You can see they go up. All of them dropped a little bit in one day or another. But this is our big deal. Okay, our thermoneutral pigs that had been heat stressed ate more than our thermoneutral pigs. So there was some compensatory intake during lactation, and all of them ate more than the heat stressed pigs. Okay, and that was shown in the weaning weight of their piglets. So eating more made them produce more milk, let their piglets be bigger. Okay. And so there's a lot going on in this time period in the pregnancy, and it affects energy balance, it affects hormone levels, and it's quite intriguing, and it really, we wanted to follow some of these animals through some detail. This is heat stressing throughout gestation, respiration rate going up, so the heat stress is getting worse as there's more metabolic heat associated with fetal growth, maintaining rectal temperature, or again, lowering with those pregnant ones. This is a group where we applied heat stress just for the first half of gestation, and then they were all moved to thermoneutral. And at farrowing, these ones that were thermoneutral actually suffered a little bit more. So there seems to be potentially some conditioning from gestational heat stress. Okay, that's what I was showing you before. Respiration rate goes up, goes back down pretty quickly. Okay, so all of this is set up to say what happens. This sow is pretty dramatic, and if she's respiring that much, and to the extent her rectal temperature isn't controlled, we're really interested. So we've talked mostly about these pigs that were thermoneutral, heat stressed in pregnancy. We haven't talked hardly at all about the piglets, and that's where the checkoff funding came in. This is actually USDA NEFA funding. A lot of these pigs went to Iowa State. If you look up Jay Johnson, he came to Iowa State to do his PhD. And all the pigs, we'd heat stress our sows in our chambers, and then at weaning we'd send them up to Ames. And they did a lot of work with these pigs, characterizing that they have different metabolic rates, different rectal temperatures, different body compositions, okay? Just from the environment that they were fetuses in. If their mother was heat stressed versus not heat stressed, okay? And that's the only slide of Jay's I'm going to show you, because I'm going to show you the work that we did at Missouri, and it was all checkoff funded on these pigs. I'm going to show you 2 Barrow slides, everything else on gilts. So unlike when our sows were heat stressed and affected their feed intake, in this case they were only heat stressed in gestation. They farrowed together in the same room, and our intent was for it to be thermoneutral. It wasn't the chambers. Okay, this is weight, birth weight, up through weaning weight at 21 days. They were identical. Okay, no difference. At weaning, the Barrows, we kept the Barrows and the gilts out of one group. So this is 12 litters. The Barrows went into the grower, and then the finisher. Here they were group housed. Here they were, actually these are all individually housed. And if you look at the difference for the gestationally heat stressed Barrows, they ate more during the grower phase and the finisher phase. Okay, I don't have feed intake data on the gilts, but I don't have a reason to believe that they'd be different than their brothers. Okay, and I'll show you the data on the gilts, on their growth that we have so far. So weaning, we weaned them at 21 days. They moved out to a wean finish building. We put a total of 165 gilts in there. Had an intern came from Worcester and spent the summer, and she went out and took rectal temperatures, respiration rates, twice a day. She'd come out at 6 o'clock in the morning and 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and she'd follow these pigs around the pen, every one of them, for several weeks. And we put video cameras in one of the rooms that when they got to the end of the grower phase, I think it was 5 or 6 weeks, we split them so there were 20 to 25 pigs per pen, in kind of conventionally sized pens. We only had enough cameras for one room, so I'm going to show you behavior data on one room. Okay. Now this is data sorted, this was in the summer, this was July and August. Yeah, this is sorted by temperature rather than date. So this black line is barn temperature. And as the barn temperature in this wean finish barn went up, respiration rate went up. That's breaths per minute. This is because I I had somebody else who recorded it and they did bad math, but they did it equally bad for both treatments. So the comparison for treatment's the same. But notice, are they coping? Well, respiration rate went up, skin temperature and rump temperature, so both skin temperatures, ear and rump, went up. Rectal temperature was maintained. Okay? The only thing that differed between the two groups was breaths per minute. Okay? So there it is again, broken out by treatment. So there's the barn temperature. If you were gestationally thermoneutral, you breathed a few more times than if you're gestationally heat stressed, especially at these higher temperatures. Okay? So what does that mean? Were they not coping as well? Well, they were coping as well. Rectal temperature is the same, but they had to work harder to cope. So that takes energy, right? So I showed you well, I'll show you these ones. The video cameras. There's a lot of different behaviors, and I just had her go in the top of every hour for that several weeks. 24-hour day. So this is an observation, top of the hour for each pig in the trial. And what were they doing? And were they laying? Were they sitting? Were they doing various things? Eating, drinking? The ones that we had a lot of observations on were standing and laying. I'm just going to show you standing. There's a percentage of pigs that were standing at any given time. So in the middle of the night, they mostly laid down. They got up first thing in the morning. They went and took a nap, and they got up, a bunch of them, and ate again. And you might tell yourself that the heat-stressed pigs stood a little bit more. But I had her record where they were standing. This is the percentage of pigs that were standing by the feeder. Okay? So I can't tell you that they ate more, because I don't have feed intake. They were penned together. Okay, they were in the same pens. But they certainly occupied the feeder space more. Okay? There's no question that if they were gestationally heat-stressed, they wanted to be closer to the feeder. Does that mean they ate more? Their brothers ate more. I showed you that. I believe that they ate more. Okay. This is the growth rate. And there's absolutely no difference. Okay. So that extra feed, I don't know where it went. My colleagues at Iowa State say they had an elevated body temperature, you just didn't measure it often enough to detect it. Okay. That may be true. Anyway, so they weren't different phenotypically there. And we were really interested in pursuing the reproduction of these animals, and that's something that wasn't going to be possible. And we couldn't take them back to our farm because of biosecurity. So we worked with Virginia Tech University, and we started at still on campus, or our South Farm. When the oldest pig was 149 days old, and they were born over 5 days. So 144 to 149 days of age. We started daily boar exposure for 15 minutes a day, full physical contact. Our boar went lame, and we got the backup boar who was a young boar. Okay, so we had very poor boar stimulation. Only 6 of the 123 treatment gilts showed heat within 40 days. That was pretty bad. Okay, I've only had that happen to me once before. It was another research project. So we took those 81 that hadn't. Let's see, of the 117, yeah. So 81, we treated all 117. 81 of them responded to PG600 treatment. So labeled dose to induce cycles in non-cycling females. Okay? And then so we shipped all 123 of them to Suffolk, Virginia, to the Tidewater Agricultural Research and Extension Center, where they had space to build some farrowing groups and farrow them out. Okay? Just for completeness, we said, well, let's at least see if the treatments responded differently to PG600, and they didn't. Okay, similar patterning, which you'd expect. Okay, so what happened when they went to Virginia Tech? Well, they were group housed. Their facility there is group housing gestation. They mated them by artificial insemination. They were limit fed, very conventional management, ad lib in lactation, twice a day feeding. They tried to do no fostering. When they did fostering, it was only within treatment, within 24 hours of birth. This farm is PERS negative. It's seropositive for mycoplasma ileitis, but they've seen no clinical signs for several years. Okay? So it's probably there, but these pigs were naive when they went. Okay? What happened to these pigs? Well, gestation length didn't differ. This is gestationally heat stressed, gestationally thermoneutral. So again, these are fetuses. Were farrowed together in a thermoneutral room after their mothers were either heat stressed or not. And then they were managed together thereafter. Okay? Weight at breeding, they managed these pigs very well. They were identical. They were feeding to body condition. Gestation weight gain, the same. Lactation weight loss, you might tell yourself that's different. It wasn't statistically. Okay? So 42 versus 50 pounds. What about feed intake? This was one of those that approached significance. Okay, there's only, Kevin, 53 litters combined. Okay, so we don't have a lot, but that's a 12 pound versus 11 1/3 pound average daily feed intake. Okay, all parity 1 females. Okay. Now I showed this data at the Lehman conference last September, and at that time 3 of our 4 farrowing groups were done. And this is total number born alive, stillborns and mummies, and the number weaned, because there was a tendency for differences in survival rate. Okay? And what happened with 3/4 of the pigs farrowing, we had a statistically different number weaned, okay? With the gestationally thermoneutral benefiting, weaning more pigs. Okay? Ate less feed, weaned more pigs. And so my collaborator says, let's just not farrow the 4th group. But you do, because you do, and unfortunately, they flipped. So everything became statistically not significant. Okay? I think we're there biologically. I have every reason to believe it. Most of our measures say it, consistent with what the Barrows have done as well on body composition, feed intake things. So these pigs are different. Okay, and when we plot this out, this is just the litter size, the heat stressed in red, thermoneutral in blue. These aren't statistically different, the proportions, but if you graph that, you'd say, these are going to have more big litters, it looks like. Okay? Pre-weaning survival also approached statistical significance. Okay? And when we do reproductive measures, it takes a lot of observations to catch the statistical difference. The trends are all pretty consistent. Okay? Again, the benefit going to being gestationally thermoneutral. So part of our objective was to say, what's the true value of cooling pigs during gestation? Okay? So when I look at our data, I think that the direct effect of thermal stress on pregnant females is starting to be understood, and particularly parity 1 females. So we're more likely to house them at the cool-in cell of the barn. We're more likely to be willing to put in cool cells and things like that. Some of that's mediated through the dam and the subsequent progeny, and I think we're really only beginning to understand that. And as we begin to understand that, I think the true cost of heat stress, and when I talk about seasonality, I focus on heat stress, really starts to be understood. Terrible differences in feed efficiency, some differences in carcass, so not consistent. And I think we're starting to understand our reproductive differences. Okay? And so at Virginia Tech, these sows are farrowing out their 2nd litters, and Shelley Rhodes is looking at milk production and milk composition differences to see if that might explain some of the differences as well. Chekhov has funded our 2nd heat stress project on these similar pigs. We're doing things a little differently in this group. We're not going to farrow them out. Okay, I think we can get more data by slaughtering them as pregnant females. And so we're going to do some really intense data collection. We haven't done endocrine profiles by parity, but that's the other thing we'd like to get done and show how they vary. Okay, this is it's kind of a bad figure, but it lets me tell you what we're doing with the next Chekhov study. These are going to be synchronized with matrix, bred artificially, confirmed pregnant. They hit 24 days. We'll move them to our environmental chambers, and we'll heat stress them. So this will be days 30 to 60 of gestation. Okay. So as we look at all the effects and what we're seeing, it looks like the difference is probably in the ovary, and this is when the ovary is doing most of the development. Okay. Whoops. And and the heat stress throughout the duration of gestation is something that's academic and not practical. I mean, if you have 115 days of that kind of heat stress, I really feel sorry for you. Okay, but most of our pigs are raised in places where we do have 30 or 40 days of it. Okay, so they'll be heat stressed for that period of time. Then they'll move to thermoneutral, and we'll have they'll all move to farrowing and reasonably thermoneutral. They'll lactate. We'll wean those pigs. We'll measure growth and puberty of all the gilt progeny that were either gestationally heat stressed or thermoneutral. We will breed them, and then we'll breed. They'll be going through their parity 1 gestation, and we'll slaughter them. Okay, and we're going to slaughter different times. And we're going to really study the fetuses, and we'll be able to look at ovulation rate and number of fetuses, so we can calculate whether there are differences in ovulation rate, embryo survival. We also have a group back here that will heat stress here, and we'll slaughter these, measure their fetuses, and we'll look at the ovaries on those animals. And so when we slaughter these sows, we'll look at their fetuses. We'll also, of course, look at their ovaries and uterus and all those reproductive parameters. Okay. So I'm going to show you, I think, 3 or 4 slides, because in the title it said mitigating the impacts of seasonality, and so I feel like I should at least touch on mitigating and not just our research and some of the things that on farms suffering great seasonality, things I see they can do. One, you can add air conditioning. In general, probably only practical for the bore studs. Checking and calibrating ventilation systems is huge. On a lot of farms, how effective is that cool cell? Certainly less than 50% effective. Okay? And when you see cool cells that are dry, or they got big mouse holes chewed in them and those sorts of things, I mean, there's a lot of things that can go wrong with the cool cells and make them less effective. I don't know how well these show up, but that's a clean fan, that's a dirty fan. And the engineers tell me that dirty fan operates at no better than 80% efficiency. So how often do you clean your fan blades and shrouds? I'd say in farrowing it ought to happen at least every time you clean the room. In gestation, I don't know. We struggle with that, but adjusting belts and bearings and making sure everything's working as well as it can. If you're using drippers, that 0.8 gallons per hour was kind of the target. And so a lot of it's barn management, because not just, our data is pretty much all parity ones. All of the data on heat stress will show you that parity ones are more sensitive. So if we have part of the barn that we know is less comfortable thermally, that's where we want the old sows. Okay, keep our parity ones as comfortable as we can. And there's interest in use of exogenous hormones for solving it. The one that's legal is PG600. So it's labeled for treating non-cycling females. Okay, so a lactating sow, particularly in the summertime, that has that delayed weaned estrus. We can talk about when that should be, etc. But we can really enhance reproductive performance of those females if we can't manage the thermal environment. And I showed you this data because if we're using Avigel, I think this becomes even more important. So Bree Quick, so one of my grad students who's finishing up, and this was a project she did at a commercial unit. It was a startup unit that was weaning 11.5 pigs. They started weaning in July, and I said, you guys, and their home farm, they were doing Avigel, so they said, we're going to do Avigel. And they said, P1s in the summer, weaning large litters, Avigel is predicated on that weaned estrus interval of 4 to 7 days. And these sows aren't likely to have it, and they say, you can do this if you want. So we came in and we treated half of them with PG600 on the day of weaning. So they got weaned into a gestation stall, just treated every other crate with PG600. And then they followed their standard procedure, which was to give them Avigel according to the label. So at 96 hours, breed 24 hours after that. Okay. This is pregnancy rates, 71% versus 86%. So if you can pick up 15%, clearly if we're going to go with Avigel in the summer, on parity ones, I think PG600 really has placed. Prostaglandins, oxytocin in the semen, there's some research on that. It's all off-label. I'm not going to say anything more about that. Feeding accordingly, lactation feed intake is such a big deal. All the things we can do to maximize feed intake are important, and some of it we forget about. So what's the difference between this picture and this picture? Yep, and so the location of the heat lamps. So if you look at the udder, okay, this is about a 5 degree Fahrenheit difference on the udder. Okay, it's pretty easy. And these pigs, they're not piled, they're avoiding the heat, and so it just gets into the kind of husbandry skills really, and kind of doing everything right every day. Okay, so with that, I just thank the sponsors, USDA, NEFA, and largely Pork Checkoff.